Do you remember the great American novel? For like 200 years, writers at the top of their game have attempted to craft it. And a whole mess of critics and intellectuals and academics have endlessly debated which book might get to carry the lofty title. Do you remember when people used to read, like, books? I mean, real books. If I could throw in my 2 cents, I'd like to nominate Train Dreams by Denis Johnson as the great American novella. In this video, I'm going to talk about Train Dreams and discuss why I think it deserves to be up there amongst the highest levels of the great American novels, even though it's a 128-page, essentially short story. So let's discuss. Train Dreams is an odd and amazing little book. And in this video, I'm going to divide this video into 2 parts. So in part 1, I'm going to just kind of give an overview of what this book is. It seems like this book is getting a lot of attention recently because of the film adaptation that came out fairly recently. And I watched the movie, but I'm not going to talk about the movie. I just want to talk about this book. But anyway, part 1 is an overview of this story and the characters and kind of like what this is. And then part 2, and this is important, so pay attention. Part 2 is an analysis, a deeper analysis of the climax of this story. And it will contain a lot of spoilers. So I just want to make that clear. If you have not read this book, and you should read this book, please watch only part 1 and do not watch part 2. And if you have read this and you are curious about the climactic sequence of the story and when it becomes very surreal and very strange and kind of dreamlike, like what's really going on there, that's what part 2 focuses on. So if you have read this, please watch. You can watch the whole video. But if you have not read this book, please only watch part 1 because I do not want to spoil this for you. All right, let's start with Denis Johnson. He's one of my very favorite writers, not only for his dark subject matter and broken, fallen world, far from God, world-weary wonderment, but for his craft. His sentences are unlike any other writer's, and his characters are well made with believably strange dialogue and unforgettable scenes. Train Dreams was originally published in the Paris Review in 2002, and it was then released in hardcover in 2011, so it took a while. And this edition is published by Farrar, Strauss, and Guyrox. You know, those FS and G. There's a few blurbs on the back here, but actually the one that I want to read from is by Michael Ondaatje, and it's not in this book. Michael Ondaatje said, "Johnson is one of the best prose writers in our time. It's a love story, a hermit story, and it's also a small masterpiece. You look up from the thing dazed, slightly changed." That was in the New York Times. I feel like big books are often fetishized in the United States, but this is a very small book. As I said, it's 128 pages. It's essentially a long short story. And although it's a small book, it is packed with a lot of emotion, gorgeous imagery, and scenes built with sentences as poetic as they are gorgeous and descriptive as they are heartrending. Yet it never feels like Johnson is showing off. He's just getting to the heart of the thing. He's just leading you through this lost to history world in a very intimate and believable way. This story centers on the life of Robert Grainier. And I love that name, you know, Grainier. It kind of evokes, I think of the Pacific Northwest. This book is set in northern Idaho, just south of the Canadian border. And in Washington, there's a large mountain called Mount Rainier. And I feel like Grainier and Rainier kind of share the same sound. Although I don't know if that was intentional, but like, because this is, you know, the edge of the Pacific Northwest, it kind of works. And also, I think of amber waves of grain. I think of grainy old photographs, and it's a really great name for this kind of character who's at the center of the American frontier, the last of the American frontier. Grainier is the ultimate outsider, and he's trying to make his way using his hands and his limited skills. He works as a logger, a laborer. He does construction on these massive railroad bridges, and he also like hauls goods in a horse-drawn wagon. But most importantly, he lives alone in a cabin that he built with his own two hands in northern Idaho, in a very remote part of the Moyea Valley. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. Moyea Valley. I'm just going to say Moyea. Oh, yeah. And he's always separate. He's always alone. Robert Grainier is essentially unknowable. He comes across early in the book as kind of a blank canvas in a way. But that is very much a deliberate choice by Johnson, because in making him a blank canvas that the reader can kind of project onto, this allows Johnson to paint scenes of the grotesque, the absurd, the tragic, all the strange characters and bizarre events. Here's another great example of Denis Johnson's way with dialogue, the kind of Beckett-esque dialogue, and also just a really very brief but very memorable side character. This guy, this mechanic named Heinz, who's a German immigrant. This is from page 87. The old man had a Model T of his own out front of his place. He had its motor cover hoisted and was half lost down its throat, it seemed to Grainier, who'd never had much to do with these explosive machines. Grainier asked him, "Do you really know how that motor works inside of there?" "I know everything," Heinz sputtered and fumed, somewhat like an automobile himself, and said, "I'm God!" Grainier thought about how to answer. Here seemed a conversation that could go no farther. We do feel for Robert Grainier, in his wish to do good, in his wish to make amends for the mistakes that he has done. He's not a perfect man. He has almost committed murder at the very beginning of the story. And, you know, he tries to make amends for these things, and he tries to live his life as best he can. But he's also very lost, and he doesn't really have a place. He doesn't even realize that he's become a hermit until he's lived that way for so long that he can't really change. He faces repeated tragedies, and it's all of these kinds of events, both large and small, that add up to a very remarkable life. And it at first, even though he seems unknowable, as the book goes along, the reader will really sympathize with him, and he'll kind of get under your skin or get into your heart in a way that makes him actually quite an unforgettable character. His life is quite remarkable as he lives to around 80 years old, and you get to see the main events from his life unfold. And in such a brief period of time, too. That's the genius of this book. Just a few sentences are doing a lot of work, and that actually makes this book incredibly re-readable. I feel like almost endlessly re-readable, as short as it is, because you can pretty much read this in an afternoon. This book, it kind of jumps around. It doesn't proceed in a linear fashion. It's really like a series of memories. Robert Grainier is not telling the story. There is a narrator who's telling the story of his life, but it almost seems like at the end of your life, you kind of look back and you remember all of the things that happened to you, and it's all just different pieces that are kind of thematically linked, but chronologically they're all over the place. And so I'm actually going to talk about some of the events in this book. No spoilers, but I'm going to do it chronologically, even though the book does not proceed chronologically. So I got my little scribbles here. See if I can even read my own writing. So Robert Grainier was sent to Idaho, the town of Bonner's Ferry, when he was about 6 or 7 years old. He was sent alone by train, and he has this like sign around his neck saying, his destination. And he doesn't even remember his own name. He doesn't know his birth name. And he doesn't know whether he was born in Utah or Canada. One of his cousins tells him that he's a Mormon from Utah, and another one says, no, you came down from Canada and you spoke only French when you arrived. So he has no idea. And by the time he's old enough to really think about it, his aunt and uncle, who he's sent to live with, have passed away, and he actually doesn't know his own history. And that becomes kind of a metaphor, if you think about America, the country of the United States, and the United States really has no long history. It just appeared in terms of the colonies and the Western civilization, and the Native Americans, their cultures were erased, their languages were erased, and the white colonists, they really didn't have much of a history. They had to kind of make up their own history. They had to make up names for places, and using New York as like York from England or things like that. So it works in that way. He's very American in the sense like he sort of appears out of nowhere, and he doesn't even know his own name. And his uncle is Robert Grainier the first, and so he becomes Robert Grainier Jr. He rides along the Great Northern Railroad, which was completed in 1893. So he was born around 1886, but he's not sure exactly when. The railroad was completed in 1893. And in 1899, two small settlements were merged together to become Bonners Ferry. Bonners Ferry, Idaho, which is a real place. All of the places in here, the river, the valley, everything is actually real locations, which makes it really fun if you go online and you kind of look up these things. I think it's around 1910. He's 20 or late 20s, early 30s, and he's working odd jobs. He's loading trucks, chopping firewood, joining these labor groups, and he meets his future wife at church because one of his cousins brings him to church. And it's not exactly clear, but I think he was married around 1917. He gets married, and in that summer, he's building a bridge across a gorge. It's called 11 Mile Cutoff Bridge. And the opening sequence of the book, this is not a spoiler because it's the very first paragraph of the first chapter. He, with a group of men, attempts to throw a Chinese laborer off of this bridge for reasons that no one can determine. Did this man commit a crime? Certainly he probably didn't commit a crime worthy of being thrown off of the trestle. And Robert Grainier joins in because he feels like he should help. He has no idea what's even going on, and he feels no animosity toward this man, even though when he gets into the mob mentality, he feels like he wants to kill him, and then later he ends up regretting for the rest of his life. He will feel such remorse that he attempted to kill this Chinese man. So I think it's in the same year. I think he has his first kiss, and he proposes marriage on the same day. And he gets married, and then in the summertime, he's building this bridge and goes through this insane experience with the attempted murder. I'll read you the scene here of Gladys and Robert Grainier's first date. This was on a hot June day. They'd borrowed a wagon from Gladys's father and brought a picnic in 2 baskets. They hiked over to Grosling's meadow and waded into it through daisies up to their knees. They put out a blanket beside a seasonal creek trickling over the grass and lay back together. Grainier considered the pasture a beautiful place. Somebody should paint it, he said to Gladys. The buttercups nodded in the breeze, and the petals of the daisies trembled. Yet farther off, across the field, they seemed stationary. Gladys said, "Right now I could just about understand everything there is." Grainier knew how seriously she took her church and her Bible, and he thought she might be talking about something in that realm of things. "Well, you see what I like," he said. "Yes, I do," she said. "And I see what I like very, very well," he said, and kissed her lips. "Ow," she said, "you got my mouth flat against my teeth." "Are you sorry?" "No. Do it again, but easy does it." The first kiss plummeted him down a hole and popped him out into a world he thought he could get along in, as if he'd been pulling hard the wrong way and was now turned around, headed downstream. They spent the whole afternoon among the daisies, kissing. He felt glorious and full of more blood than he was supposed to have in him. When the sun got too hot, they moved under a lone jack pine in the pasture of Jeremy grass, he with his back against the bark, and she with her cheek on his shoulder. The white daisies dabbed the field so profusely that it seemed to foam. He wanted to ask for her hand now. He was afraid to ask. She must want him to ask, or surely she wouldn't lie there with him, breathing against his arm, his face against her hair faintly fragrant of sweat and soap. "Would you care to be my wife, Gladys?" he astonished himself by saying. "Yes, Bob, I believe I would like it," she said. And she seemed to hold her breath a minute. Then he sighed, and both laughed. In 1920, in northwest Washington, he attempts to make repairs on the Robinson Gorge Bridge. And then he gets kind of fed up with that, and he decides to go logging with the Simpson Company. In Chapter 2, here's an excerpt from Robert Grainier's work as a logger. Cut off from anything else that might trouble them, the gang, numbering sometimes more than 40, and never fewer than 35 men, fought the forest from sunrise until supper time, felling and bucking the giant spruce into pieces of a barely manageable size, accomplishing labors, Grainier sometimes thought, tantamount to the pyramids, changing the face of the mountainsides, talking little, shouting their communications, living with the sticky feel of pitch in their beards, sweat washing the dust off their long johns and caking it in the creases of their necks and joints. The odor of pitch so thick it abraded their throats and stung their eyes, and even overlaid the stink of beasts and manure. I think he's around 35 years old in 1920. And 1920 is also the year that there is a huge forest fire, the Moyea Valley Fire, near Bonner's Ferry. And his cabin that he built is completely destroyed. In April of 1925, he quits logging due to old age, because even though he's not necessarily so old, he's probably 40, in his early 40s, but the logging life has completely destroyed his joints, and he's becoming quite elderly quite quickly. His joints went to pieces. If he reached the wrong way behind him, his right shoulder locked up dead as a vault door until somebody freed it by putting a foot against his ribs and pulling on his arm. It takes a great much of pulling, he'd explain to anyone helping him, closing his eyes and entertaining a darkness of bone torment. More than that, pull harder. A great deal of pulling now. Greater, greater. You just have to pull until the big joint unlocked with a sound between a pop and a gulp. His right knee began to wobble sideways out from under him more and more often. It grew dangerous to trust him with the other end of a load. "I'm got so I'm joined up too tricky to pay me," he told his boss one day. He stayed out the job, his only duty tearing down old coolie shacks and salvaging the better lumber. And when that chore was done, he went back to Bonner's Ferry. He was finished as a woodsman. So he gets a horse and wagon. He sort of leases these two elderly horses and this wagon, and he starts hauling goods around Bonner's Ferry. His last job of 1925 is he transports a man who was shot by his own dog. Let me read an excerpt here about the dog shot man. This is a great example of the pure, black comedy of this book. Listen to some of these descriptions and this bizarre kind of Beckettian dialogue. As his last job for that year, Grainier agreed to transport a man from Meadow Creek to Bonner's who'd actually been shot by his own dog. The dog-shot man was a bare acquaintance of Grainier's, a surveyor for Spokane International who came and went in the area, name of Peterson, originally from Virginia. "Are you feeling like you need anything?" Grainier said at the start. Grainier thought Peterson had gone to sleep, or worse. But in a minute, the victim answered, "Nope, I'm perfect." For the first few miles, he didn't talk much to his passenger, because Peterson had a dented head and crazy eye, the result of some mishap in his youth, and he was hard to look at. Grainier steeled himself to glance once in a while in the man's direction, just to be sure he was alive. As the sun left the valley, Peterson's crazy eye and then his entire face became invisible. If he died now, Grainier probably wouldn't know it until they came into the light of the gas lamps either side of the doctor's house. After they'd moved along for nearly an hour, without conversation, listening only to the creaking of the wagon and the sound of the nearby river and the clop of the mares, it grew dark. Grainier disliked the shadows, the spindly silhouettes of birch trees, and the clouds strung around the yellow half-moon. It all seemed designed to frighten the child in him. "Sir, are you dead?" he asked Peterson. "Who? Me? Nope, alive," said Peterson. "Well, I was wondering, do you feel as if you might go on?" "You mean as if I might die?" "Yes, sir," Grainier said. "Nope, ain't going to die tonight." "That's good. Even better for me, I'd say." In 1927, he flies in a biplane for the first and only time. Grainier was aware only of a great amazement, and then he was high in the sky, while his stomach was somewhere else. It never did catch up with him. He looked down at the fairgrounds as if from a cloud. The earth's surface turned sideways, and he misplaced all sense of up and down. The craft righted itself and began a slow, rackety ascent, winding its way upward like a wagon around a mountain. Except for the churning in his gut, Grainier felt he might be getting accustomed to it all. At this point, the pilot looked backward at him, resembling a raccoon in his cap and goggles, shouting and baring his teeth. And then he faced forward. The plane began to plummet like a hawk, steeper and steeper, its engine almost silent, and Grainier's organs pushed back against his spine. He saw the moment with his wife and child as they drank Hood's sarsaparilla in their little cabin on a summer's night. Then another cabin he'd never remembered before, the places of his hidden childhood, a vast golden wheat field, heat shimmering above a road, arms encircling him, and a woman's voice crooning. and all the mysteries of this life were answered. The present world materialized before his eyes as the engine roared and the plane leveled off, circled the fairgrounds once, and returned to Earth, landing so abruptly Grainier's throat nearly jumped out of his mouth. And in the 1960s, the early 1960s, he's almost 80 years old. The U.S. Highway 2 bridge that spans Moyea River's deepest gorge is being constructed at that time, and he gets kind of moved and amazed by these young guys constructing this bridge and how different the technology has become since he was young. All right, now let me talk about some of the themes. The taming of the wilderness. So this story centers on the westward expansion, especially the railroads and also the logging, the optimism of so-called progress of the western expansion, manifest destiny, and all of that is symbolized by trains. Trains bring the flood of people, both white and Chinese, building bridges, laying track, logging the forest, and displacing the Native Americans. Yet this forward motion and dominating attitude of civilization is repeatedly halted by floods, forest fires, trees themselves killing loggers unexpectedly. But according to one of the fellows, Arn Peeples, an old man now, formerly a Jim Crack Sawyer, the trees themselves were killers, and while a good sawyer might judge 99 times correctly how a fall would go, and even by remarkable cuts and wedging tell a 50-tonner to swing around uphill and light behind him as deftly as a needle, the 100th time might see him smacked in the face and deader than a rock, just like that. Arn Peeples said he'd once watched a 5-ton log jump up startled and fly off the cart and tumble over 6 horses, killing all 6. It was only when you left it alone that a tree might treat you as a friend. After the blade bit in, you had yourself a war. Church is only a place to meet and greet other people. It really can't help with mystical matters like visitations of spirits, or when a man is killed by a tree, when a post office is washed away and carried downriver into British Columbia, or when an entire community or multiple communities is wiped out by a massive fire. There's no spiritualism to be found there. And in those scenes, religion's absence is strongly felt. The smallness and the fragility of human beings in the face of the massive power of nature is certainly shown repeatedly. So you can imagine the tension between the wild and the civilized, and that comes into play amongst all of the characters and the setting itself. That theme ties this book to the great traditions of frontier literature, of American literature. There's a fellow logger that Robert Grainier works with named Arn Peeples, and I love this. "I'm made for this summer logging," said Arn Peeples. "You Minnesota fellers might like to complain about it. I don't get my gears turning smooth till it's over 100. I worked on a peak outside Bisbee, Arizona, where we were only 11 or 12 miles from the sun. It was 116 degrees on the thermometer, and every degree was a foot long, and that was in the shade, and there wasn't no shade." He called all his logging comrades Minnesota fellers. As far as anybody could ascertain, nobody among them had ever laid eyes on Minnesota. Arn Peeples had come up from the southwest and claimed to have seen and spoken to the Earp brothers in Tombstone. He described the famous lawmen as crazy trash. He'd worked in Arizona mines in his youth and then sawed all over logging country for decades, and now he was a frail and shrunken gadabout, always yammering, staying out of the way of hard work, the oldest man in the woods. In just 2 paragraphs, you can see, so you can tell a lot about this man. This is what I'm talking about when I say that Denis Johnson has such a way with sentences and brevity, brief sentences that say so much. Such great word choice, too. A frail and shrunken gadabout. In Denis Johnson's writing, ordinary scenes often morph into spiritual visions without fanfare or explanation. Think of the opening sequence in Car Crash While Hitchhiking in Jesus' Son, of the rain coming down. "I rose up sopping wet from sleeping under the pouring rain, and something less than conscious, thanks to the first 3 of the people I've already named. The salesman and the Indian and the student, all of whom had given me drugs. At the head of the entrance ramp I waited without hope of a ride. What was the point, even, of rolling up my sleeping bag when I was too wet to be let into anybody's car? I draped it around me like a cape. The downpour raked the asphalt and gurgled in the ruts. My thoughts zoomed pitifully. The traveling salesman had fed me pills that made the linings of my veins feel scraped out. My jaw ached. I knew every raindrop by its name. I sensed everything before it happened. I knew a certain Oldsmobile would stop for me even before it slowed. And by the sweet voices of the family inside, I knew we'd have an accident in the storm. I didn't care. They said they'd take me all the way. Similarly, Train Dreams is about a man whose life is swallowed by loneliness and grief, but who still remains open enough to occasionally be visited by wonder. In many of Johnson's stories, moments of mystical significance often follow scenes of grief, addiction, or violence. Broken people are open to the ineffable. Mystical ruptures break through everyday chaos, enveloping characters in awe or dread. And the thing that I love the most about Denis Johnson is he refuses to confirm whether these are literal miracles, like acts of God, the hands of God, or simply internal projections, hallucinations, visions, dreams. There's never confirmation, verification, or closure, only the flicker at the margins of perception. Johnson often likes to play with a biblical tone. There are always references to Jesus, angels, the wilderness, but it's always without dogma. So he uses the Bible as a poetic frame for wonder and suffering, but it's not used as a belief system. And this is something that has confused a lot of readers and critics, because you have these heartbreaking stories and these characters who are at the bottom. They've hit rock bottom and they've fallen through rock bottom and they're even below in hell. And yet there's all of this biblical imagery being thrown about. There's no stability there. There's nothing to hang on to. It's just images and just references. And it's kind of a negative theology of sorts. God is not visible, and the absence of God is felt in the very fabric of our fallen world, which is shot through with strange, unexplainable mysteries that hint at something larger yet unknowable. And the absence of a defined spirituality, yet an occasional flickering of what might be called strange miracles, is left to both the characters and the reader equally. We can interpret that in our own way as the characters are trying to interpret it in their own way. Neither the characters nor the reader gets any resolution from Johnson. And I love that. Is there really some greater mystery winking at us, or is it all just a trick of the mind? What we can agree on, and what we can agree with Denis Johnson on, is the unknowable nature of the universe. The strange wonder that we might call God, or we might leave unnamed, instead choosing to feel it as a profound experience. All right. I have too many notes here. I'm going to go into part 2 now. From here on out, this is spoiler territory, so please stop watching. Don't watch the rest of this video. That's the end. Thank you for watching. Goodbye. From now on, I'm going to talk about the climax of the story, the part where things get really weird and really interesting. It's always interesting, but the strangest part of the story. So again, if you have not read this book, please do not watch this. This is pure spoilers. If you've watched the movie even, I don't know, it might ruin the book for you. So this is for the people who have read Train Dreams and are interested in what happens toward the end, the climax of Robert Grainier's life, and sort of what everything builds up to. That's what I'm going to talk about now. So, spoiler alert one more time. Let's move into part 2. All right, here we are in part 2, major spoilers. I'm going to talk a little more about the themes of Train Dreams, but also I'm going to talk about the climax of the story. And forgive me for just pretty much reading straight from my notes, but I scribbled and scrawled a bunch of stuff here, and I don't want to try to make eye contact with the camera. So many a reader has been confused and wondered about the climax of this story, where Kate Grainier, Robert Grainier's lost daughter, seems to reappear. Of course, Kate was, seemingly lost in a forest fire. Robert Grainier's wife Gladys and Kate were never found after the fire that destroyed their cabin in the remote area of the Moyea Valley. On a certain night that actually coincides with the funeral of Robert Grainier's friend, Kootenai Bob, this Native American guy, these wolves enter the yard around Robert Grainier's cabin, and his daughter seems to reappear in the form of a feral child raised by wolves. So what is Johnson trying to say here? Why does he choose to center the climax of the story on such a strange and possibly hallucinatory experience? I believe this scene to be the emotional climax of Robert Grainier's arc as a character. His grief and longing is finally answered as he realizes that his daughter has not been lost, and she actually survived, although in this kind of monstrous form. And there have been rumors going around the community of this wolf girl that's been spotted. And Robert Grainier himself hears these stories, and he gets kind of terrified, and it's like a nightmare for him. And so when he actually sees her, he's frozen in fear at first. But then he will very quickly realize that it must be his daughter, and then he tries to take care of her. And so it's a very, very strange mix of emotions, and it's a culmination of the themes that have been building throughout the story. So as I mentioned in part one, the contrast between wilderness and civilization. So every night there is the howling of wolves, and Grainier has this impulse that he wants to join in. So he has this feral dog, and the dog has some wolfish pups. He thinks they might be half wolf, and one of the pups never howls with the wolves who are howling in the distance. And so he tries to teach the pup how to howl, right? So he starts howling along with the wolves, and then he finds that he really enjoys howling. After he howls all night long with the wolves, he kind of feels this like release, and he feels very warm and buoyant afterwards. But often thereafter, when Grainier heard the wolves at dusk, he laid his head back and howled for all he was worth, because it did him good. It flushed out something heavy that tended to collect in his heart, and after an evening's program with his choir of British Columbian wolves, he felt warm and buoyant. So the howling of the wolves and the impulse of Grainier to join in with them is actually contrasted by the roar and the whistle of the Spokane International Railway. These trains go by his cabin and they disturb his sleep. They give him bad dreams. And also his character itself has this tension because he feels comfortable howling with the wolves at night. But when he visits town, his character is very restrained. He's a very quiet man, almost to the point of silence, opening up only to his friend Kootenai Bob, the Native American who I mentioned. Robert Grainier is usually at a loss for words. He doesn't really understand people. He seems to put up with the sterile regularity of the town of Bonner's Ferry just so that he can continue living in the wilderness. This theme is also demonstrated when the wolves enter his property. At first he fears them, and he actually takes a moment to react because he's so stricken by what exactly is happening. And then, he fears this wolf girl that he's built up in his civilized mind as this monster. But as soon as he approaches her and he starts to realize that she has the eyes of his lost daughter, he attempts to care for her, and he tries to help heal her injuries. And that's kind of a key moment because we haven't actually seen Robert Grainier caring for anyone or anything besides his little red dog, the feral dog that came to him and had the wolf puppies, the wolfish pups. Of course he cared for his wife and his daughter, but since they were lost in the fire, we really haven't seen him caring for anyone. Also, as I mentioned, the parallels of destruction, so forest fires, floods, falling tree limbs, and wolves describe nature's unpredictability and unknowable power. The primal energies of the ancient world are manifested in events which kill, terrify, and humble the white settlers which are trying to shape the land in the image of civilization, even as they cut down huge swaths of forest and build precarious bridges over deep gorges. People themselves are sometimes shown to be uncivilized to one another, as when trying to kill the Chinese laborer at the beginning of Chapter 1, or the racism that leads to the death of Kootenai Bob. This is another huge spoiler. So it should be noted that the appearance of the wolf girl coincides with the slowing of the trains for Kootenai Bob's funeral. Ancient spiritual forces growing stronger at the death of a man connected to the old world, yet living in the modern world, and who is literally destroyed by the modernizing forces of the railroad and alcohol. Kootenai Bob's indigenous knowledge anticipates the wolf girl's appearance. There's not a wolf alive that can't tame a man. And that's the Kootenai belief in wolves as teachers or warriors, representing the strength of survival, animal ancestry as power. The interplay of these themes creates a haunting resonance between the lines. This is a story about what lies beneath and outside of ordered civilization, what is lost, what resists erasure, and ultimately what remains, even if it is changed. The wolf girl then emerges from the wilderness as something else entirely. She's drawing upon her survival instinct to find a place in the gray area between human and animal, in the same way that her father, Robert Grainier, is trying to find his place in the gray area between the wilderness and civilization. This is what makes Denis Johnson's writing so powerful and affecting, and also elusive. His work is rich with spiritual and mystical moments, but they don't fit comfortably inside of any kind of belief system. It's just mysticism, it's just wonder, and the characters are just as lost as we are. These moments shimmer at the edge of comprehension. Mysteries remain mysterious, and the power of the world humbles the individual, all of it destabilizing one's belief or identity in very shocking ways and that change them forever. And that's the beauty of Denis Johnson, I think. Not only in this book, but in his writing in general. All right, this video was probably a little bit longer than I intended, so if you're still sticking with me, I just want to say thank you so much for watching. I really hope you'll give me a comment about this book, or about the movie. If you watch the movie, they're quite similar. I watched the movie recently, and it was okay. I love this book, let me just say that. If you've never read anything by Denis Johnson, this is actually a pretty good place to start. His books are all pretty different, but they always have those the kind of darkness in there and the mystical strangeness in there. So yeah, check it out and let me know what you think. My name is Chris, and this has been another episode of Talking Sunoco Blues. Take it easy.